So there's never been a major documentary on this, but I just want to touch on it to maybe if anybody listened to the podcast, they got to give them an indication we should have one. So we're going to talk about the 1972 WHA General Player Draft. Not a traditional draft you would see later on in the WHA, but a draft to basically designate what players some of the teams were considering either picking up, trading for, buying out, free agent signings, whatever. Now, the General Player Draft for the WHA was held over the course of 2 days on February 12th and 13th in Anaheim, California. The purpose of the draft was to establish an orderly process through which WHA teams would stock their rosters for the 72-73 season. As such, players from other professional leagues, including the NHL, were eligible to be drafted. The draftees were not under any legal obligation to sign with the drafting WHA club. Only WHA clubs were prevented for negotiation with the players who had been drafted. So you couldn't draft somebody and have another team try to overbid. It didn't happen. Now, the draft was held in two parts: a preliminary round, in which teams made so-called priority selections, and the rounds of the general draft which followed. For the preliminary round, each team wrote 4 names on a piece of paper, which were then submitted and announced prior to the start of the general draft. The priority selections were the most sought-after players, consisting mostly of NHL veterans and highly talented prospects. Now, 12 teams took part in the draft: the then Calgary Broncos, Chicago Cougars, Dayton, later Houston Aeros, the Edmonton Oil Kings, later the Alberta Oilers, the LA Sharks, the Miami Screaming Eagles, the Minnesota Fighting Saints, New England Whalers, Winnipeg Jets, and 3 then unnamed franchises based in New York, Ontario, later the Ottawa Nationals, and Quebec City, later the Nordiques. Now, the Broncos folded within months before the beginning of the season, and negotiating rights to their picks were transferred to the Cleveland Crusaders. Similarly, the Screaming Eagles never took to the ice, but their picks transferred to the Philadelphia Blazers. The Dayton Aeros moved to Houston before the playing season, and the Oil Kings changed their name to Alberta with intent of splitting home games between Edmonton and Calgary. Now, the Broncos took Barry Gibbs, Jim Harrison, Dale Hoganson, and Jack Norris. The Chicago Cougars took Stan Mikita, Jerry Korab, Jim McKinney, and Gary Smith. Dayton took Guy Trottier, Andre Hinz, Larry Lund, and Wayne Rutledge. Edmonton took Normie Ullman, Bobby Clark, Bruce McGregor, and Phil Meagher. LA Sharks drafted Ken Dryden, Perreault, Matt Ravlich, Steve Sullivan. Miami Screaming Eagles, Bernie Parent, Jules Drouin, Derek Sanderson, and Bill White. Minnesota Fighting Saints, Peter Mahovlich, Mike Curran, Bill Goldsworthy, and Dale Talon. New England Whalers, Bobby Sheehan, Eddie Johnson, Rick Lee, Larry Plow. New York, Jerry Desjardins, Dave Gardner, Billy Harris, Steve Shutt. Ontario, or Ottawa Nationals, Dougie Favell, Dave Keon, Brad Park, Eddie Shack. Quebec City, Gilles Lemieux, Guy Lapointe, Jacques Lemaire, and Johnny McKenzie. Winnipeg Jets, Bobby Hull, Teddy Green, Teddy Irvin, and Ernie Wakely. Now, regular rounds, Calgary, rounds 1 to 10. Stevie Carlisle, Ron Hemenuk, Rod Lansbury, Jim McMasters, Morris Mott, Jerry Pinder, Larry Romanich, Greg Shepard, Brian Walker, Jimmy Watson. Rounds 11 to 20. Ron Boehm, Anatoly Fursov, Josef Kolanka, Lauren Henning, Skip Craig, Bernie Lukowich, Ray Martignac, Randy Rhoda, Dallas Smith, Stan Weir, Jeff Ablett, rounds 21 to 50. Wayne Bell, Dwight Bellows, Yuri Blinov, Lyle Bradley, Gary Brown, Ken Brown, Jim Carliff, Valerie Harmeloff, Dave Dunn, Ed Dick, Grant Erickson, Jan Iziet, Jerry Hart, Peter Hagema, Ted Hodgson, Doug Orville, Joseph Horzowski, Ken Ireland, Daryl Nibbs, Al McDonough, Ray McKay, Murray McNeil, Ernie Mosa, Vaclav Nemansky, Rod Norris, Veli-Pekka Katola, Daryl Sittler, Gordy Swerbeck, and Joe Watson. Rounds 51 to 70, Grant Clay, Wendell, Len Frigg, Ken Gustafson, George Hill, Les Jackson, Marshall Johnson, Gunnar Lundquist, Barry Meisler, Peter Muller, Wayne Morsarak, Tommy Pinder, Al Rycroft, Alice Schroeder, Jim Shaw, Ed Sidebottom, Carl Sweetburge, Ron Willey, Richard Wilson, Jerry Wright. Round 71 plus, Dave Amato, Lee Bannister, Dave Bonter, Bill Hay, Rob Heaney, Herb Howdy, Alexander Maltsev, Darren Mott, Vladimir Petrov, Morris Stefanow, and Gary Swan. Now, the draft itself went very quickly, but the most interesting thing I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that you were seeing a lot of pressure on the minor leagues to provide players at his new association. But I know for a fact that some of these players will never be signed, so you're dealing with a waster pick. But I know New York went totally Marlboro's, Toronto Marlboro's, rather than draft an NHL player, which is totally bizarre. And there was a few WHL prospects, some IHL, some US. So it was a big mix. But that was one of the first times that Steve Shutt came into the mind of both leagues, which would come in handy later on for Steve to look at contract negotiations. So, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening. Have a good day. Bye.